Before we really get started, I want to take a moment to talk about how we're going to look at characters in this course. Because this class is not about listing traits or labeling characters as good or bad or even necessarily likable. What we are doing here is studying character psychology, how characters are shaped by desire, fear, flaw, and pressure, and how those internal forces make certain figures feel haunting, real, and unforgettable long after the story ends. Throughout this course, we're going to treat character as the psychological and emotional core of story. Plot still matters, of course, but we're interested in what drives the plot. What's happening underneath the surface. Why characters make the choices they make, especially when those choices are messy, contradictory, or unsettling. We'll be guided primarily by Robert McKee's book Character, which gives us a shared vocabulary for talking about motivation, internal conflict, and transformation. From there, we'll move through a deliberate arc in selected works of both film and novel, starting with theory, then grounding that theory in emotional realism, and finally watching how those same psychological structures evolve in modern Gothic and horror storytelling. That's why the course moves from McKee to Stephen King to Mike Flanagan, with Poe and Bronte woven throughout. King becomes our bridge between realism and the supernatural, between literary interiority and visual storytelling. And Flanagan shows us how those same Gothic anxieties, grief, obsession, repression, are reimagined for contemporary audiences. By the end of the course, the goal isn't just that you can analyze characters more clearly, but that you can see them differently, as systems of pressure and psychology, as studies of humanity with all its contradictions and quiet terrors, and as King says, sometimes the real monsters are human. Once you start seeing characters this way, it becomes much harder to go back to consuming stories passively. One quick shift I want you to make right away is how you think about research in this course. We're not collecting quotes for volume and how well you can research, and we're not trying to prove how much we've watched or read. Instead, research here means evidence selection. You're learning how to notice specific scenes, moments, or details that reveal something true about a character's psychology. One line of dialogue, one decision under pressure, one visual choice that tells you more than a paragraph ever could. So as you move into this week's work and throughout the course, I want you thinking less about gathering everything and more about choosing what matters. You'll be asked to identify at least 2 concrete pieces of evidence from your chosen film, moments that actually support the psychological claim you're beginning to explore, using the frameworks we're working with this week. This is why you are given several choices for film or reading, and as your peers may not have viewed or read the same scene you have, it will be your description, explanation, and supporting evidence of your analysis that will drive the conversation. Now, this is where Robert McKee as our foundational support becomes really important for us. McKee asks us to stop thinking about characters as personality types and start thinking about them as psychological systems. Every compelling character is driven by 3 core forces: desire, flaw, and internal conflict. Desire is what the character wants, the thing pulling them forward. The flaw is what keeps getting in the way: fear, trauma, self-deception, obsession. And internal conflict is what happens when those 2 forces collide inside the character, not just in the plot or external action. When you look at someone like Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, or Joel in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, or Kay in Blade Runner 2049, what makes them feel alive isn't what they do. It's the tension between what they're reaching for and what they're incapable of resolving. This is where archetypes stop being templates and guide paths that you have studied in foundational courses and start becoming individuals. The loner, the lover, the seeker, the hero, the sage. Those are starting points. What matters is how desire and flaw twist those roles into something very specific and human. So as you're watching and analyzing this week, I want you asking yourself, what's driving this character underneath the story? Can we separate what happens from what the character is psychologically wrestling with? And if we can't, that's usually where the most interesting analysis lives. To deepen this a bit, I want to pull in a few ideas from the other materials you're working with this week, because they all circle the same truth from different angles. One of the biggest misconceptions about character is that they need to be likable. What actually keeps us watching or reading is relatability, and relatability comes from lack. Characters feel real when they're missing something, when they're reaching for fulfillment in ways that don't quite work. That gap between what they want and what they need is where we recognize ourselves. At the same time, characterization isn't about being told who someone is. It's about what we infer. It's the subtext in both dialogue and action. What a character does under pressure. The contradictions between how they present themselves and how they actually behave. That's where true character shows up. It's not a written description. It's not an on-the-nose narrative scene, but in action and choice. And psychologically, this is why confined spaces, limited options, and emotional pressure matter so much, especially in Gothic and psychological stories. When characters don't have power, when they're trapped by circumstance or by their own minds, by their history and backstory that shaped them, their psychology becomes visible. So when we talk about studying character, we are really talking about studying how pressure reveals belief, fear, and desire, not who a character claims to be, but who they become when the story forces them to choose. So here's where you step in. This week, you're going to choose one character from one scene in Taxi Driver, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, or Blade Runner 2049, and you're going to slow that moment way down. I want you looking at internal versus external goals, what the character is visibly trying to do in the scene, and what they're actually wrestling with underneath it. What they want versus what they need. And more importantly, how those two things clash. Use McKee's language to help you think, not to box you in. Ask yourself, what contradiction defines this character? Where does desire collide with fear, limitation, or self-deception? And what moment in that scene reveals who this character really is when they're under pressure? This isn't about being right. It's about being curious. I want you to generate more than one possible question before you settle on one. Follow the tension. Follow the discomfort. Those are usually signs that you found something worth unpacking. And when you respond to each other, don't evaluate, interrogate. Ask questions. Push ideas further. Help each other see what might be hiding just beneath the surface. Think of this week as learning how to enter a character's psychology, not explain it away. This week's materials will give you a great start to changing your perspective on examining and shaping a character.